You are about to witness the most devastating takedown in HOA history. This woman, the iron-fisted president of our so-called community, thought she could bankrupt us with fines for our legally parked, completely operational classic cars. She claimed they were abandoned vehicles, an eyesore ruining her property values. She was wrong. Dead wrong. Because she didn't realize we had cameras. What those cameras caught at 3 a.m. wasn't just malicious. It was criminal. She thought she was banning our prized possessions. Instead, we got her fired, arrested, and permanently banned from the community she once ruled. The consequences for her were swift, final, and absolutely glorious. Welcome back to Community Conflict, the channel where homeowners associations go to crash and burn. If you've ever had a neighbor like this, if you've ever been crushed by petty bureaucracy, you know the rage we're feeling. Before we dive into this insane high-stakes battle, please do us a massive favor. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Every click helps us fight the good fight and expose another tyrant. Now, let's get into the deep dive, the abandoned vehicle conspiracy. Our story begins in the meticulously manicured suburban hellscape of Crestwood Heights, where every blade of grass is legislated and every resident walks on eggshells. Meet our protagonist, Mark, a good-natured mechanic and classic car enthusiast. Mark didn't have a messy yard, yet a passion. Parked neatly in his driveway were two vehicles, his daily driver, a sensible sedan, and his weekend project, a fully registered, running, and insured 1968 Ford Mustang. It was a beauty, covered with a heavy custom-fit car cover to protect the chrome from the elements. This Mustang, this shining symbol of American muscle, was the original sin in the eyes of the HOA board, or rather, the eyes of its president, a woman we'll call Doris. Doris was the kind of person who saw rules not as guidelines for community living, but as weapons to enforce her personal aesthetic preference. She had an obsession with uniformity, and Mark's car cover, while completely legal, was a blight on the streetscape. The initial conflict was minor, almost laughable. Mark received his first official notice, a warning about unapproved driveway coverings. The fine, if not corrected, would be $50. Mark, being a reasonable person, immediately called the HOA office, explained that the cover was legally permitted to protect registered property, and pointed out that nowhere in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions CC and RS was a car cover specifically prohibited. He even offered to change the color of the cover to HOA-approved beige. Doris, who personally oversaw all correspondence, shot back a curt, printed reply: "The board maintains the right to interpret the CC and Rs for the greater good of the community's appearance." Mark thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. He received the first fine 3 days later, $50. He paid it, chalking it up to the cost of living under a petty dictatorship, and vowed to attend the next board meeting. But before the meeting could even happen, the stakes were raised dramatically. The next notice arrived via certified mail, and it was a gut punch. The violation was no longer unapproved covering. The subject line screamed, "Notice of intent to tow. Abandoned vehicles, not $50." This time, the fine was $250 per day for both the Mustang and, inexplicably, his wife's completely pristine SUV, which was parked behind the sedan. The letter cited an obscure clause requiring vehicles to be moved at least every 72 hours and free of any cover or visible signs of non-use. The penalty section was terrifying: towing at the owner's expense and a mandatory board hearing for potential legal action. Mark's blood ran cold. The fines, backdated 3 days, were already mounting. He looked out at his driveway. The Mustang had been under the cover for 5 days while he waited for a replacement part. His wife's SUV was parked legally, uncovered, and she had driven it just 2 days ago. It was a blatant, fabricated attempt to harass them. This wasn't about the rules. This was about Doris's personal vendetta against him and his hobby. He was angry, but he was also smart. He didn't just fire off an email. He installed for high-resolution, night vision security cameras, discreetly positioned to cover his entire driveway, the street, and the path to his garage. He set them all to continuously record and upload to a secured cloud server. He knew with a sinking feeling that the rulebook wasn't enough to fight Doris. He needed evidence of her overreach. The fines for his abandoned vehicles hit the $1,000 mark before he even had a chance to appeal. He was trapped. He knew the HOA board, controlled by Doris's cronies, wouldn't listen to reason. He had to wait for Doris to make her move. He didn't have to wait long. The camera system was installed on a Tuesday. The following Friday, at precisely 3 a.m., the cameras went live. Mark woke up at 7 a.m. to a terrifying sight. The car cover was ripped off the Mustang, crumpled on the lawn. The tires on both the Mustang and his wife's SUV were marked with bright orange fluorescent chalk, the kind parking enforcement uses. Scrawled across the windshield of the sedan, in bold black permanent marker, is the word tow. This was not official procedure. This was vandalism, plain and simple, executed under the guise of HOA authority. Mark's initial feeling of shock quickly morphed into white-hot rage, and then a grim satisfaction. He walked straight to his computer and opened the cloud footage. He skimmed the night from midnight to 6 a.m., watching the silent, high-definition timeline. At 2:58 a.m., a dark-colored sedan pulled up 2 houses down. A figure emerged. It was small, cloaked in a dark hoodie, moving quickly, almost furtively, towards his property line. The camera angles, meticulously planned, provided 3 different views: a wide shot of the street, cut a close-up of the driveway, and a third angle, capturing the pedestrian walkway. The person walked up the driveway, a can of chalk spray paint in one hand, a bundle of car cover material in the other. They bent down near the tires. The timestamp read 3:01 a.m. Then, the most unbelievable moment, the figure paused directly under the street lamp, pulled down the hood for a quick, nervous glance around. The high-resolution lens captured a crystal-clear image of the culprit. It was Doris, the HOA president. Her face, usually pinched and severe, was caught in a moment of frantic, illicit activity. The footage showed her chalking the tires, marking his wife's completely operational SUV, and then the malice of it all. It's grabbing the corner of the heavy custom-fit Mustang cover and violently yanking it off, deliberately tearing a large section near the bungee cord. She then took the black marker and defaced his property. The whole operation took less than 2 minutes. She scurried back to the waiting sedan, which sped off without lights. The evidence was irrefutable. It was clear and damning proof that the HOA president wasn't just enforcing rules. She was manufacturing the violations. She was trespassing, defacing private property, and colluding with an unknown accomplice, the driver of the getaway car, to create the pretext for massive fines and the destruction of his property. Mark immediately called the police, but the responding officer, a young rookie, was hesitant. "Sir, this is primarily a civil matter. The damage is minimal, and it involves an HOA. We usually avoid those." Mark pushed back, showing the officer the footage on his phone. "Officer, she is on private property at 3 a.m., vandalizing my vehicle. She is creating a criminal violation to enforce a civil fine. That's fraud and harassment." At minimum, the officer took the report but warned him that without a clear dollar amount of criminal damage, it might not go further than a warning. The fines, however, were still accumulating. Official HOA towing notice arrived that afternoon, claiming his cars met the criteria for abandonment based on the officer's inspection, meaning Doris's midnight raid. The notice demanded $1,500 in fines be paid within 24 hours, or the tow trucks would arrive Monday morning. Mark was helpless. The police weren't acting fast enough, and the HOA's internal appeal process was weeks away. He had the video proof, the smoking gun, but the bureaucracy was moving faster than justice. The threat of losing his prized Mustang and having to pay thousands was a terrifying reality. He felt the crushing weight of institutionalized harassment. Doris had won the first round. Mark realized the police and the HOA's internal structure were dead ends. He needed to hit Doris where it hurt, her power base and her wallet. He took the high-resolution, time-stamped footage, created a detailed timeline, and compiled a comprehensive packet of evidence. This packet included the initial vague warnings, the sudden escalation to abandoned vehicles, the $250 day fine notices, and the undeniable video of Doris's 3 a.m. vandalism. He didn't send it to the HOA board. He didn't send it to the community manager. He sent it to 3 specific entities. 1. The State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, alleging racketeering and financial fraud by an association officer. 2. The HOA's master insurance provider, alleging gross malfeasance and creating a liability nightmare for the insurance company. And 3. The local sheriff's department's major crimes unit. Bypassing the initial rookie and focusing on the criminal aspects of trespassing and destruction of property, He also emailed the full uncut video link hosted on a secure public access platform to every single homeowner in Crestwood Heights via the community's official, albeit rarely used email list, which he had legally obtained through a records request months earlier. The subject line was simple: "Your HOA president. Watch what she does at 3 a.m. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. Within an hour, the HOA community email chain was alight with furious replies. Within 3 hours, a representative from the HOA's master insurance provider called Mark. They were panicking. Doris's actions created massive liability for them, exposing them to potential lawsuits from Mark and a likely class action suit from every homeowner who had ever been wrongly fined. They immediately sent a cease and desist to the HOA board, ordering them to halt all enforcement actions and towing attempts against Mark's property, pending a full independent investigation. The next morning, a detective from the sheriff's major crimes unit showed up. Unlike the rookie, this detective saw the severity, the malicious use of a position of power to commit a crime, the calculated destruction of property to generate fraudulent fines. They secured the higher resolution, original footage, and initiated an official criminal inquiry. The core victory came that afternoon. The HOA board, now fully aware of the public outrage, the criminal investigation, and the catastrophic liability threat from the insurance company, convened an emergency meeting, which was predictably chaotic. Mark attended silently. They didn't even try to defend Doris. By a unanimous vote, the board stripped Doris of her presidential powers, suspended her from the board entirely, and issued a formal written apology to Mark, publicly retracting all fines, refunding the $1.00 he had already paid, and committing to paying for the repair and replacement of his damaged car cover and the professional detailing of his car to remove the permanent marker. The towing threat was over. Mark had won the battle. The immediate fallout for Doris was comprehensive and brutal. First, the sheriff's investigation moved quickly. The accomplice in the getaway car turned out to be her brother-in-law, a man she had been secretly paying to monitor properties and report violations. Under questioning, the brother-in-law crumbled, providing damning testimony that Doris had specifically instructed him to drive her to Mark's house and wait, confirming the premeditated nature of the vandalism and fraud. Second, the community's response was a tidal wave of righteous anger. Mark's email and video footage had been forwarded to local news outlets. A reporter for the regional news showed up, running a major expose that evening, complete with the grainy, chilling footage of Doris vandalizing Mark's property. The shame was absolute. Doris's home became a focal point of public scrutiny and ridicule. Third, the HOA's master insurance provider, now thoroughly spooked by the financial risk, mandated that Doris be immediately removed as an authorized signatory on all HOA accounts and permanently banned from holding any future position of authority. They made it clear that if she remained on the board in any capacity, they would drop the entire association's coverage, leaving the community vulnerable to massive lawsuits. This left the board with no choice. She was officially, humiliatingly, and permanently removed from all association roles. The payback was financial, administrative, and legal. The HOA, now under interim leadership, offered Mark a settlement to cover the emotional distress, legal fees, and the cost of the destroyed cover. The criminal case against Doris was the final, decisive blow. Faced with irrefutable video evidence, her brother-in-law's testimony, and massive public pressure, Doris's lawyer advised her to plead guilty to reduce charges. She took a plea deal that included heavy financial restitution to the HOA to cover the cost of the entire scandal and the damage to the association's reputation, a massive personal fine, and a year of supervised probation. The court also issued a final, fitting decree, a permanent restraining order specifically barring her from holding any position of authority in the Crestwood Heights HOA and prohibiting her from contacting Mark or his family. But Mark, ever the meticulous planner, had one last move. The community was so outraged by Doris's conduct that it catalyzed a movement to rewrite the most punitive sections of the CC and Doris. Mark, now seen as a hero, ran for the open board seat left by Doris's forced resignation. He won by a landslide. His first action as a board member was proposing and successfully passing an amendment that clarified the abandoned vehicle rule. It was explicitly changed to state that a vehicle must be unregistered, uninsured, or non-operational to be considered abandoned. Furthermore, it introduced a new strict anti-harassment malfeasance clause that allowed homeowners to sue the association or its officers for knowingly creating fraudulent violations. Mark had not only defeated Doris, it had permanently institutionalized the victory into the governing documents of Crestwood Heights. The final, secondary revenge was delicious in its simplicity. Doris, now disgraced and isolated, decided to sell her house and move out of Crestwood Heights. Mark, using his newly won influence and deep knowledge of the CC&Rs and a little help from his new majority on the board, ensured that her closing process was held to the most excruciating, petty, and hypervigilant scrutiny imaginable. Every single minor violation she had ever created for others, a small weed. A mailbox, a millimeter off-center, a speck of dirt on the sidewalk was suddenly applied to her own property during the closing inspection. Her closing was delayed by 3 weeks, costing her thousands in holding fees, all because of the very rules she had weaponized against others. She was forced to pay the highest, most comprehensive closing compliance fine in the community's history. The day the moving van pulled out of Crestwood Heights, Mark and his wife stood on their front porch, sipping coffee, watching the last symbol of her tyranny disappear down the street. The irony was perfect. The community was finally free, and the Mustang was safe. And that, my friends, is how you execute a legal, administrative, and criminal nuclear option on a rogue HOA president. What was the most shocking part of this story for you? Was it the 3 a.m. vandalism, the felony fraud charges, or Mark turning the tables to inspect Doris's house? Let us know in the comments. If you loved this sweet, sweet revenge, remember to subscribe, ring that notification bell, and share this video. We have more HOA horror stories that need exposing, and we can't do it without you. We'll see you in the next conflict.